The Home Office has confirmed now that Hadush Kabatu has been deported. You'll remember he is the asylum seeker who went on to sexually assault a teenage girl, was convicted and imprisoned, then accidentally released from prison last week. The Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has said that last week's blunder should never have happened. I share the public's anger that it did. I would like to thank the police for rapidly bringing Mr Kabatu into custody and the public for their vigilance. I've pulled every lever to deport Mr Kabatu and remove him off British soil. I'm pleased to confirm this vile child sex offender has been deported. Our streets are safer because of it. Alex Norris is Minister of State at the Home Office, joins me now. You must be relieved.
Matt, thanks for having us. Hadush Kabatu's a child sex offender. He has no place roaming our streets. I'm glad our streets are safer and he's been removed overnight.
Yeah, it took a bit longer than you would have liked. I mean, we were hoping this was, well, we were expecting this rather. You would have been hoping that we'd hear about this in the past couple of days.
As the Home Secretary said, we're angry about the process, we're angry about the blunder that's taken place. We're grateful for the police, the vigilance of the public to make sure this individual was corralled again, but delighted that the process has come to its end in the way that it should, which is a sex offender taken off our streets and taken out of our country.
On accidental prison releases, the year to March shows that there were 262 people released by mistake by the prison service, more than doubling the figures from the year before. Are you sure this won't happen again?
Well, we've put in place immediate enhanced controls to make sure that it doesn't. We're having what's happened in this case reviewed independently to learn those lessons. One is too many. So we don't want it to happen again, and that's why we're putting these things in place to make sure they don't.
Why do you think it has been happening? Why has the number increased?
Well, clearly there's been a challenge, but in this case, particularly a handover moment, there needed clearly to be greater clarity about what we expected to happen for that individual. Yeah. We're still getting to the bottom of this case, but the controls we put in place in the meantime will prevent it from happening again.
It does beg a belief, doesn't it, that someone's being released from prison and they're not putting the checks and balances in to make sure that that is correct. It seems, I imagine to a lot of people watching, that should be pretty basic.
It's unacceptable. It's why we're so angry about it. It's why we put those changes in.
The other thing you're talking about today at the Home Office is you have apprehended a lot of illegal workers. Tell us more.
Yeah, people think it's too easy to come here, often illegally, and melt illegally into our economy. That's not right. We've just brought to an end the biggest year in history in terms of immigration enforcement raids. We've done 11,000 of those raids. That's led to 8,000 arrests. And, we've sent a really strong signal that if you think you can come to this country and work illegally, you can't. So
one of the examples that you put out in your release is that in August, 15 men, Kazakh, Turk, Georgian, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, Tajik, were arrested for illegally working at Goldbeck Solar Farm in Bristol. They've been, deported now, I assume?
Well, I wouldn't want to tell you what's happened in all of those cases. Yeah. We know that 1,000 people have been
That came from
deported.
your own release, by the way.
Well, no, of course. No, but depending on the nature of the offending for those individuals, of course, some of the outcomes may be different. But we're very pleased to say 1,000 people have been deported as part of this process. That's part of an overall number of 35,000 that have been deported since we came to office. Yeah. We actually want to go further. At the moment, your point for deportation is generally around the 1-year sentence mark, prison sentence. We're changing that in the sentencing bill so that if you have a suspended sentence of a year, then you'll be deported. We need to see, we really want to ramp up this activity because if people commit crimes, come to this country, commit crimes in this country, well, they should leave this country. We've seen that with Hadush Kabatu. We've seen that with 1,000 people in these raids.
Coming back to this example of Goldbeck Solar Farm, the example that your team put out, if you look at Goldbeck's website themselves, this solar farm, they say we do not tolerate any form of illegal employment and undeclared work. We pledge ourselves and our business partners to observe the legal regulations to employ our own employees and those of others. Well, clearly, by their own standards, that hasn't happened in this case that you have told us about. It's one thing dealing with the people who are working illegally. What happens to the people who are employing them illegally?
And Matt, this is really crucial because businesses that employ illegal labour undercut good British businesses that are doing things the right way.
They're breaking the law.
They're breaking the law and they're undercutting their competitors. That's not right. At the moment, there are right-to-work checks in law that mean they have to, check the identification. The reality is there are loopholes in them that mean that that's not working properly. So we're closing that loophole through legislation that's in front of Parliament at the moment, being slowed down by the Tories and Reform, by the way, to make those checks more stringent and to say that if they break that law, They will be subject to 5 years in prison. They'll be subject to unlimited fines. This isn't good enough and has to change.
Are you pursuing business bosses then, as well as pursuing the illegal workers?
Absolutely. As I say, those penalties are significant ones. We're saying don't price this in as just the cost of doing business and maybe it's worth it and you'll get a fine and, price that into the money you've saved. We're putting on the face of legislation 5-year penalties in prisons. We cannot have businesses do this. That's what the whole organised trade preys off this, and that's why we're changing it.
This is also going to lead to that discussion around digital ID or ID cards perhaps as well. The Prime Minister's talked about wanting to bring that in. It's something that Labour governments previously tried and didn't end up bringing in. Do you think that's more likely the case now?
Well, we've made the commitment. You've seen the commitment the Prime Minister's made that we're going to bring this in by the end of this Parliament. In the meantime, because we can't wait for that, that is a really good underpinning of a system to make sure that that check, that this person has a right to work, is a really good one. But in the meantime, we have Home Office systems in place. Employers must use them. And for those employers who think that they are out with it and can use that loophole, we're closing that loophole too. They must use those checks.
When it comes to digital ID, people who are obeying the law, getting on with their lives, working where they should, is it not an infringement on their civil liberties? They feel like they're being spied upon by Big Brother.
Well, that isn't the purpose. The purpose will be very easy.
You can understand how some people would respond in that way.
And, I've heard, whether it's from my own constituents or in the public conversation more generally, some of the concerns people have. That's why we're consulting on it, to get it right. But at its fundamental, people who are working in our economy must have the right to do so.
How is life in the Home Office right now? I mean, your boss, Shabana Mahmood, says it's still riven with problems, including holding on to staff, which I suspect is not what you need unless you're making cuts to the civil service, and dealing with contracts as well. We heard yesterday that a contract has been put out to tender for asylum accommodation that goes way beyond the end of this Parliament. In fact, it's a contract that could run until 2039. Is that correct? Because as far as we understood it, you want to end asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament in 2029.
Well, Matt, can be very clear, we're closing every single hotel in this Parliament. We've made that commitment and that's what we're going to do.
So where's that contract come from then, if it's being put out to tender?
But the type of accommodation that we procure isn't just hotel accommodation. Sometimes it's accommodation in the community. The reality is we want the smallest possible population of folks housed that need that support, because we do have an obligation in law to prevent destitution. So whether that's by processing people's claims more quickly, removing them if they don't have a good claim, or getting them on with their life if they do have an asylum claim. So, but that starts with shutting those hotels, because we know that communities up and down the country want to see that.
You'll be well aware that earlier in the week the Home Affairs Select Committee put out a report criticising the Home Office, both under Labour and under the Conservatives previously as well, for not making sure these contracts and these contractors are held to account. There was millions of pounds left on the table that could have been recouped by the Home Office. Have you got that money back yet?
We are recouping money from those contracts. These are contracts signed 2019, very many years before we took office. We're trying to get the best out of them. We are working
Were they badly written, these contracts? Were they?
Well, I think they were written for a different time. I think if I was being really kind, This was, of course, a government, the previous government, that totally lost control over the immigration system. This is another aspect of that. So we are working within the bounds of those contracts to recoup money for the British taxpayer.
But nevertheless, happy ship at the Home Office or work to do?
Of course there's work to do. Tackling migration, stopping the boats, closing every single hotel in this country is an absolute core part of this government's plan for change. So, yes, there's lots of work to do, but we're getting on with it with purpose.
Just finally, we started by talking about Hadish Kabatu, who now we know has been deported back to Ethiopia, which is where he originally came from. What happened to that individual who was part of the one-in, one-out pilot scheme, who went back to France and came back again? Has he now been deported, or is he still here?
Well, he's wasting a lot of his own time. So he's come through, he was detected immediately at the front door, he is detained, and he will be removed from this country. He hasn't gone yet, but he will be removed.
He's still here?
Yes, but he will be removed.
When will he go?
Well, I wouldn't want to give a specific timeline, but we will be removing him as soon as possible. He has wasted his time coming back over. Yeah,
it wasted a lot of your time and your resources, and rather shown that this pilot scheme perhaps isn't fit for purpose.
No, not at all, Matt. The reality is people are always going to test your front door, test your boundaries. This person's done that, totally wasted their time in doing so. Others who will look at that, whether in France, whether further away, and think, hey, maybe I can just keep trying till I get in, not going to work.
OK. Alex Norris, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.